Tzaharaim Tovim, good afternoon. This week we're discussing Parsaht VaYeshev, and I've entitled this Is Being Settled Enough? The very title of the Parasha, VaYeshev, Yud, Shin, Vet, is the shoresh for sitting or being settled. We say, where do you live? Eifo Yoshvim. Hatoshavim, the people who settle, who live, who are found in a certain place. Yeshiva, the place where people go and sit and learn. It has a sense of settling. There's another word for where do you live, Efa Tagar or Atgara. Where do you dwell? Gimel Resh. The same sheresh, the same letters, Gimel Cholam Resh, that refers to the ger, the other, to the giur, to the one who converts into Judaism. This word, Yoshev, or VaYeshev, has a sense of Shah, we're here to stay. I've reached a certain comfort level in my life. But when we look at the parasha and at the accompanying haftarah, we will find anything but that, which leads me to the question, is being settled, whatever that may be for each of us, enough? Aviva Zornberg entitles her reflections on this parsha, Remembering the Dismembered. To be sure, that's a rather dark theme, but she teaches it is indeed most apt. The very name of the parsha, VaYeshev, is a term to convey comfort, stability, calm. However, as she points out, no doubt, Yaakov, Yisrael, is exhausted after all his travels and travails and just wants to settle. Thus, VaYeshev. However, this is not meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, it is indeed the wrong goal. There's enmity between his sons, questionable behaviors and responsibility attributed to Yosef, the story of Yehuda and Tamar, and his poor behavior and assigning of inappropriate blame. And of course, Yosef is thought to be dead due to the hand of his brothers. Yaakov does not get any psychological or emotional rest. So while he may be feeling the myth or the aspiration of being physically settled, this is clearly not everything. He may want more. But Zornberg suggests that he is not understanding his role here and is too ready to acquiesce when there is clearly much more work for him to do. She teaches as follows. We may perhaps find some clue to understanding in a phrase in the source Midrash, when the righteous settle in peace and seek to settle the world in peace. Satan comes to accuse them. Subtly, the Midrash indicates a possible imbalance of the attitude of the righteous. Given a time of tranquility, they discover in themselves a passion for tranquility. They seek to settle in peace, which arouses the anger of Satan. In the original Midrash, the righteous make themselves vulnerable to Satan's attack. They release a certain force of evil in the world by their overwhelming desire to settle, to discern in this world the innate structure and meaning of life, which we are not meant to do, as you'll recall. If we respond to this nuance in the Midrash, we understand that it is not wrong to settle in peace, but to seek with too great a need such a settling. The quest for peace is problematic. Rashi telescopes the text of the Midrash, assuming that the emphasis on seeking is abundantly evident. What he changes is the speaker of reproach. It is not Satan, but God. God asks the ironic question, is it not so much evil as misjudgment that it is issue in Rashi's readings? Taking the emphasis on quest for peace into account, Yaakov's settling becomes not a fact of being, not a status, but rather an attitude, a mode in which he seeks to appropriate his life. In the most obvious sense, he would like to settle down in the Holy Land after his years in exile and danger. He would like to read the narrative of his own life as entering a period of fulfillment, of closure, after the difficult conflicts and confrontations of his youth. This is what Aviva Zorenberg talks about in terms of Yaakov's aspirational settling. However, as we learn in Pirkei Avot, Lo alecha hamlacha likmor v'lo ata ben chori lehivatel mimena. It is not for you to finish everything that needs to be done, in this case, so that you can settle, but you do your part. It's a pause. We all know the statement that if something is truly worthwhile, it will take more than a generation to fix it. We are never, in the aspirational sense, totally settled. That is just not part of the human calculus. This feeling of incompleteness, of not feeling settled or too comfortable, which if you want you can trace back to being thrown out of Gan Eden, is precisely what impels us to move on, to change things, to work for something better than what we may be experiencing at this time, and thus feeling less than settled. Our haftarah that accompanies this parsha is also about being unsettled. It comes from Amos, chapters 2, verse 6 through 3:8. Amos, the prophet, lived in the period just before the dissolution of the 10 northern tribes, what we know as Israel. And again, remember, I'm talking about the haftarot that are paired with the Torah portion, not looking at displacement because of Chagim, as will happen this week because of Chanukah. So this we will not hear. Things are going well economically, and in fact, you could say they were feeling rather settled. In this context, he sternly warns the people that their actions would bring upon them a fate of destruction and exile. He especially rebuked the elite of the people, the most settled and the satisfied among them, for the low moral standard to which they had fallen. Perhaps this had happened due to outside influences. Perhaps their own satiated state had been the cause of their fall. The book of Amos begins with a series of prophecies delivered in regard to many of the nation states in the region of this time and their own misdeeds and abuses. Due to their sins, many of which were perpetrated against the Jews, in his perspective, they would all soon fall under the conquest of the then rising superpower, Ashur, Syria. These peoples would no longer thrive. They were Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, and Moab. Last on the list of those doing wrong were none other than the two kingdoms of Yehudah and Yisrael, for whom Amos spared no detail in outlining their wrongdoings as well. The Jews in both states had been guilty of the 3 cardinal sins: idolatry, forbidden relationships, and murder. But, according to Amos, the primary sin of which they were all guilty collectively and individually was that of corruption and injustice, which was a continual challenge for our prophets of social justice. These prophets taught and followed the dictate that lack of justice anywhere is injustice everywhere. The Bnei Yisrael were not exempt, not in our Torah, not in the words of our Nevi'im, and not today, from these charges. Our Haftarah begins, Ko Amar Hashem, Al Shlosha Pish'ei Yisrael V'Arba'a Lo Ashivenu, Amikvim B'Kesef Tzedek V'Evyam V'Avor Na'Elayim. God says, for 3 transgressions of Israel, for 4 I will not revoke the decree. Because they have sold for silver those whose cause was just, and the needy for a pair of sandals. You who trample the heads of the poor into the dust of the ground, and make a humble walk a twisted course. Father and son go sleep with the same woman, and thereby profane my holy name. They recline by every altar. They take pledges for garments. In other words, they keep the clothing of the poor when they will try to help them, but ultimately exact a price that's not fair, and drink in the house of their God wine bought with the fines that they imposed on others. The prophets of social justice rail against the immoral and unethical actions of the Bnei Israel and make it clear that any worship or presence that they hold before God is worthless until they settle this problem, these inequities, these wrongdoings towards each other. Even when God tries to provide them with guidance and direction, this too failed. In fact, what we would refer to today as mob mentality takes over. We continue. After this whole litany of things they've done wrong, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you through the wilderness for 40 years to possess this land. I raised up prophets. I raised up Nazirites. I've done all of this for you, Israel, says God. But you corrupted the Nazirites. You made the Nazirim are those who take vows against wine, against cutting hair, and against any kind of intimate relationships. You made them drink wine. You ordered the prophets not to prophesy. I'll show you. You will suffer for all of this. The strong will find no strength, and the warrior will not be able to save his own life. These words of the prophets are clearly damning, and they're clearly horrifying. When we speak aspirationally about what it means to be Jewish, and we talk about fundamental values that are possessed by other groups of faith and other individuals as well, not to their exclusion, but in terms of the fact of if we accept Torah, if we accept God, we are obligated to do these things. We are, however, subject to the same foibles, to the same weaknesses as human beings. And when we do not do these things, the point that the prophets continually make, don't bother coming with sacrifices, don't bother coming to the temple, don't bother, your piety is false. Unless you know how to treat each other, I'm not interested. And lest one think that as the chosen people, the Am Segula, whatever one takes that to be, one would get a pass on these poor behaviors, here's our prophet completely dispelling that thought. Hear this word, Israel, that God is speaking to you concerning the whole family, Al kol hamishpacha, that I brought up from the land of Egypt. You are not treating each other like family. You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. Al kain avkod alechem ekal avanotechem. Because of that, I will hold you account for your iniquities. In other words, remember those three big sins, those three big things that people were doing wrong. Yes, people are doing wrong, and we hear the same thing in the early texts of Christianity. We hear the same things in the prophets of social justice, that if you are taking advantage of the poor, of the widow, of the orphan, if you are not accepting someone who's different than you, then you are missing the point. And this is what Amos is calling the Am Yisrael, the Mishpacha, the family of Israel, together to hold them accountable for. God chooses people. One should often ask, what does it mean, the chosen people? Isn't that ethnocentric? But if you look at this, God chooses Bnei Israel to be more, to expect more, to show more, to initiate more, to not be settled, to ask more of ourselves. Don't settle. Yet this message was somehow lost as more and more comfort was achieved on any level throughout history. Back to our parsha, where we can imagine that Yaakov sees his being settled as fulfilling God's promise to him of such calm after so many years of challenge, including servitude to Lavan, angst, and finally, being able to return to his land. Yeah, maybe he's settled, but he forgot his part. He had to work, continue to work, to maintain the correct way of life and teach his sons to do the same. Almost from the beginning, we see what Yaakov himself set up, which will spiral out of control in relation to his own family dynamics. We read in our Parsaht, VaYisrael ahav Yosef mikol banav ben zekunim hu, v'asalo ketona pasim. Now we know that favorite children is not a great idea. We get that. Yosef is the son of his old age, and also the son of Rachel. Only Yosef and Binyamin of the 12 sons. So we learn, it says Israel, VaYisrael, not even Yaakov, so it uses his name as the father of a nation, if you will, or this collective, not quite a nation yet. We'll get to that later. And Yisrael loved Yosef more than all his other sons, because he was a son of his old age, and his beloved wife Rachel, by the way. And he made him a fine woolen coat. His brothers see that the father loves him more than all the brothers. Vayisanu, and he hated them because of it. V'lo yachlu dibru l'shalom, and they were not able to speak words of peace with him. Yosef has a dream, tells his brothers, v'yosifi od sneoto, and they continue to hate him even more. Now, remember the dreams, right? The sheaves of corn, they bow, the sun, the moon, the stars. One has to ask serious questions about Yosef's complicity in the family dynamics here. What do they say? Listen now to this dream which I have dreamed. And he goes on to tell them what the symbolism is. There is focus on self here, which is clearly the first step to not seeing others and watching carefully how they are impacted by one's words and actions. This is, I believe, what leads to a lack of concern for the others, as described so painfully and visually in the words of Amos. Not seeing the pain of another creates and fuels discord, hatred, and ultimately wrongdoing and heinous acts. We see this as our Parsha continues. Vayamru, isha lachev, hine ba'al chalamot. One brother says to the other, look, that dreamer is coming. So now, here's our idea. Let's kill him. We'll cast him into the pits. And we will say a wild beast devoured him. And let's see then what becomes of his dreams if he is in that pit and unable to fulfill his dreams. But Reuven hears this and saves Yosef from their hands. Reuven is the oldest. Remember that when we get to the blessings at the end in Vayechi. And he says, Lo nakanu nefesh, we will not kill him. Let us not be the ones. In fact, let's not shed blood. Let's just cast him into the pit, which is in the desert. Don't lay a hand in him. And who knows what will happen to him? It won't be on our hands. Now, one could ask, he's the oldest brother. What kind of a solution is this? Was this the best he could do? Should he have tried to come up with a better solution, with a better compromise? Or was everything just so broken? This was the best he could do. All right. So the brothers, or at least Reuven, knows enough not to kill him. Harking back to the 3 cardinal averot. Don't kill, no sexual perversions, and idolatry. But let's just walk away and pass him off to others, says Reuven. Not exactly a noble and praiseworthy deed, but now there's not blood on their hands, so to speak. Is this any better? Obviously, this presents an ethical quandary we know all too well in our lives today. As the dictum goes, the only necessary thing for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Perhaps this was the worst of what Amos observed, the bystander mentality. In the self-centered life of those who are settled, when one feels they are settled and they kick their feet up and they relax, they are not caring for the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the other, but rather will sell them for a pair of shoes, because they are no longer the other. They are relegated to nothing. It's very easy to villainize people and make them as nothing. We've seen this repeatedly in our history. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say, we're seeing too much of it today in our lives. This ignoring the humanity of the other, does that evoke what the brothers did to Yosef in our Parsha? As the Parsha moves on, any sense of being settled, VaYeshev, is clearly lost. For Yaakov, for his family, and for Yosef. Yosef finds himself in another type of exile, imprisoned due to false accusations. Stay tuned, we'll come to that later. Today we are acutely aware of the injustice and the imprisonment of too many in our world. In fact, in the Jewish community, many of us are now adding the prayer for captives as we await the release of the hostages taken by Hamas and others from Israel. And who did they take? Ironically and sadly, the peacemakers, those who chose to live on the border and work cooperatively with Arabs and Palestinians in a host of initiatives, ranging from environmental sustainability, dialogue, shared interests, sports, and most of all, their desire just VaYeshev, to sit, to be settled. This goal eluded Yaakov. It eluded Yosef. It eluded the people of Israel of Amos's time, and it is still something we are chasing and hoping for. And for those of us who still hold on to this goal of caring for others genuinely, may we never stop. And may we encourage others to take this goal on as their own and not buy the myth of being settled until we do so. Today I want to end with the words of Eli Wiesel, Zichrono L'Shalom, from his book, The Wandering Jew. When will you understand that a beautiful answer is nothing more than illusion? Man defines himself by what disturbs him and not by what reassures him. When will you understand that you are living and searching in error? Because God means movement and not explanation. God means movement. Let us continue to work towards that goal of being settled. Let us continue to help all others, including all innocent victims in our world of the many, many situations throughout the world that are resulting in too many people being unsettled. And let us pledge that we will only be settled within ourselves, within our souls, when that justice of settling is available to all. Shabbat Shalom.